Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's edition of the ArborGen TreeLines podcast. I'm your host, Paul Jeffries, and I'm coming to you today from my home office in Detroit, Alabama. And I am the Reforestation Advisor for North Alabama, Mississippi, and West Tennessee. And on today's episode, we are going to dive into from ranching to reforestation and how real world land stewardship shapes better forestry decisions. And we're going to be visiting today with my new colleague, Clint Ebert. He is our new reforestation advisor for Oklahoma, Arkansas, and northern Louisiana. So, welcome, Clint, to the podcast. I'll just let you go in, let you introduce yourself to everybody.
Thank you, Paul. And like I say again, my name's Clint Ebert. I'm the Reforestation Advisor here for Arkansas and Oklahoma. Glad to be a part of the team. Currently, do a lot of seedling and ranching as well. Far as my history goes, I graduated from Oklahoma State University in
Right,
2000.
right.
My current work history goes, I spent 15 years with Weyerhaeuser doing various different things, working for them. I spent 10 years with International Paper, working for them as a procurement forester. Currently with ArborGen. I'm glad to be a part of the team.
And we're glad to have you, Clint. So your background is a little bit different from mine. Well, it's a lot of different from mine. I grew up on my family farm here in Northwest Alabama, and it was primarily consisted of a tree farm and row crop farming. But your background in farming is a little bit different from that. You actually are a professional cattleman and rancher. Is that correct?
I don't know about professional, but yes, I do run a cattle ranch. Yeah, that is my spare time and hobby, and I do enjoy it quite a bit.
I think now wait a minute. I think having how many head was it you said you have?
We're currently running about 250 mama cows.
Okay. All right. That sounds a little bit more than a hobby to me. That sounds like a lot of work to me. So was that your background beginning? Early life was in cattle farming and you kind of focused, kind of drifted to forestry, or was it a little bit of both early on?
A little bit of both together. I've always enjoyed cattle. I've had cattle since I was in high school, but that's what
Uh-huh.
led me into forestry as well. That's when I was in
Was it?
high school. Yep.
Okay.
I was in the FFA organization, which is a school organization there. And
Oh
I
yeah.
started, that's where I actually started my agriculture and forestry career together, actually. So,
Okay.
I was on the forestry judging team there. We won state competition in 1995. We ended up in nationals in 96. And it opened my eye to agriculture and forestry in a different level. It,
Right.
you see that I can make it a profession and make a career out of it. And it's been a
Right.
great journey.
Right. Well, let me ask you this. So you said you went to nationals with with FFA. I was in, FFA. I think most high schools in the southeastern U.S. they have an FFA program, and a lot of kids get their start in agriculture and find their passion for that field of work through the ag programs in high school. So when you say you got your start, was that the first time you got into cattle? Was in high school?
Pretty much, yeah. My
Okay.
family always raised cattle on a small scale, my
Okay.
grandparents and my father, but it was not to the scale that we do it today. So,
Okay. So
like
you've
I say,
kind of built it up. You've gotten it built up then. It's
yes,
gotten
yes.
bigger. It's gotten bigger since you've been involved in it. Okay. Well, so starting out so you went to Oklahoma State for your forestry education. So kind of fill us in a little bit on what your focus was in forestry and about your, early career in forestry.
Okay. Well, my main focus that really led me into forestry was, being into the outdoors,
Right.
creating shaping the landscape that we have today.
Right.
The importance of it. Just, I got so much joy from being outside, being part of the outdoors, the wildlife, the timber
Right.
aspect of it. From being here at Southeast Oklahoma, I'm raised in the very southeast corner of Oklahoma my entire life. Forestry is a huge background for us. Everywhere you go, we've got a large paper mill. We've got several other mills. We've got Weyerhaeuser here. Forestry is just something that we've just you grew up with it. You've seen it every day. You either worked with a logger, you knew a logger, or you was interacting with them constantly. So that led me
Right.
a lot into forestry. Just being able to help shape the landscape and be a good steward of the land to truly value what was important to me. That's where a lot of
Right.
my joy came from.
Right. So I share the same interest. I started growing up, or I grew up here on my family farm, and love the outdoors, love getting out. Was always flipping tin, flipping things in the woods, trying to find reptiles and amphibians and
Mhm.
and stuff like that when I was a kid. So it seems like we all share that common interest in the care and the love for the environment, and taking care of everything. So you said that your early career, you started out, was it with Weyerhaeuser?
Yes, when I first when I first came out of school, actually I was contracting, went and I worked for Oklahoma State University for about 6 months in a research center, research plots, and then I ended
Okay.
up contracting for Weyerhaeuser. Which we actually did a lot of timber cruising, did some BMP audits, just surveys, different stuff for them. Did some, most of it was BMP audits where you come back in after they'd logged an area, and timber cruising and timber appraisals, how I started out. I did
Mhm.
that for almost 2 years with them, and then I became a full time employee and spent the rest of the time with them working there. We went through went through a harvester manager there, which we oversaw. They
Right.
had about 40 different contractors that we had that we managed at that time. Moved from a harvest manager into a procurement role to where we bought stumpage. During this time, you actually bought your own stumpage and you harvested a lot of it. So, you carried it from all the way through to the finish of it. So,
Right.
so that was the biggest role I played with them there. So I did spend 2 years as a early rotation forester with them through tree planting season, site prep, spray, herbicide release and stuff. So
Wow. So
when I
you got a very diversified introduction into forestry there with the first job. You did some management and some procurement, correct?
correct, correct. Yep.
Okay.
Let
All
me
right.
see kind of all aspects of it and see how important your management decisions really were, how
Okay.
impactful they was, to the landscape.
Okay. So let me ask you this. So that seems like to me, with your experience with what you did there, buying wood and managing and everything, that's very, in essence, you could really correlate that a lot to ranching. And you could really, looking at what you're, buying and selling and working with the commodities and everything. Is that, I mean, did you lean on some of your experience from both the ranching side and forestry when in your day-to-day life?
Yes, absolutely. I used it quite a bit. Ranching and forestry are very, very similar, as far as the landscape of the land, as far as what you start with and your outcome and being a good steward of the land. I mean, they're similar. They very
Okay.
are. So they overlap a lot.
Okay. All right. Well, to talk a little bit more about that. I mean, you own and operate a very large scale ranch, and you also work in forestry. So you're a steward of the land on multiple facets. What's your philosophy here on taking care of the land and the way you approach your everyday um, job?
Well, like with decision makings and stuff, and taking care of the land is so important to really value what you do step by step. You want to
Hmm.
leave it better tomorrow than it was today. It's
Right.
not a one time deal. You want to make good uh, decision making process where you actually have goals in mind. You understand what your objectives are of the land, what
Hmm.
you would like to see your outcomes to be. And that's what's so beneficial, like working with landowners sometimes is if they know their goals or their objectives or what they would like to have their desired outcome, you can help them reach it so much better. And that's like with ranching or with forestry. I
Hmm.
mean, like on my farm that I manage here on a day to day basis, I've got, my two boys help me quite a bit. It's a legacy that I want to leave to them. I want
Right.
them to be able to do it. So taking care of the soil, taking care of the landscape, taking care of it in a manner to sustain it for future, members of the family.
Right. Well, you just touched on something there that we probably skipped over there in your introduction and everything. So you have family, children there. Just tell us a little bit about your family.
Yeah. I've been married for 27 years. Got a great wife. I've got two twin boys that are 15 that keep me really busy. They
Oh,
try to keep me young. Yeah. Uh, we're very faith based
Uh-huh.
with our beliefs and stuff. Very very fortunate. God's been very good to us, no doubt about it. So I'm very
Hey,
blessed.
yeah.
So
Exactly. Into that. So you have 2 twin boys that are 15. They help you out? Are they kinda the cattle rustlers or, cattle drivers on the ranch?
they help me quite a bit. They're definitely involved in the day to day activities. They both took out some loans. They started their own little business on the side, and I've been helping them manage it, which is intertwined with mine. But that's great. They are my number one hands without a doubt.
Okay. Alright. What type of business do they op
They got a cattle business as well. They've
little cattle
started a
business?
youth loan. Yeah, you can go and it's through the government program. It's a youth loan that they borrowed, and that's actually how I started too, was with a youth loan
Uh-huh.
when I first began. So, and they'll loan you money, and as long as you've got a place to manage the cows and put them up, and you can go from there.
Okay.
And
Alright. Well, it
we
sounds like you've got them off to a great start. Are they interested in forestry as well?
I have one that wants to be a forester. The other one does want to be a petroleum engineer, but one of them wants to be a procurement forester one day.
Well, they're going with completely opposite
Yeah,
directions there.
completely different ways. Yeah.
So are they gonna follow in your footsteps and go to Oklahoma State?
Possibly. I don't know if it'd be Oklahoma State or somewhere, but yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Alright. Yeah,
yeah.
that's, typically my son I went to school at Mississippi State. My son wanted to, go to state as well. My 2 daughters wanted to go to Mississippi State, but unfortunately, state did not have a nursing program, so they opted to go to another school, but yes, it's funny how the children follow the parents there. So jumping back into forestry, and what attracted you? I guess I could say what attracted you to genetics and working with us and what we do here at ArborGen.
Well, as it relates back to my ranch or anything you do, genetics are so important. I
Hmm.
mean, it's so much easier to have the desired product or the desired outcome when you start with great genetics. Whether it's
Hmm.
in cattle, whether it's in race horses, cutting horses, trees, anything that you have, if you start with the good genetics, you got a much better outcome for your desired product. I
Right.
mean, most of it doesn't happen just by accident. There's a reason behind everything, and especially when you apply it to your farm. And it's so much easier to see in cattle because I can apply better genetics today and see the outcome in about 10 to 11 months on
Right.
my herd. You know what I mean? But with trees, it's a little bit longer term. It takes you a little bit longer to see the outcome of them. But starting with good genetics is the key to everything. So, I mean, because the beginning of it is so much of a predictor of the final outcome of it. It's a step one to doing it right.
I think that was a really good point you brought out there is people when they're looking at into reforestation and forestry and what we do here as private landowners, sometimes people are focused so much on the beginning and the cost of the beginning of the process and they're not as much focused on the end because it takes so long to get there. I mean, look, we're talking about, sometimes 25 to 30-year rotation, depending on what area you're in and what markets you have. But, sometimes people look at it as well. I'm already up in years and I'm not going to see the next harvest off of this property. I can't tell you how many times I talk to landowners that are they're getting up in their twilight years and they're looking at it with that approach. But you're saying that that approach is really backwards. That everybody needs to be focusing on that end game. Is that correct?
I agree with that. I do
Yeah.
because, when I change genetics, well, just say for a cattle herd, I can change the net genetics on a bull and maybe increase my pounds per calf by 15 to 20% in a year's time. And that's the same way with trees. With the new trees and the new sources that we've got growing, you can increase your percentage at the end of your harvest. You
Uh
might
huh.
have 20% more and even in a shorter rotation than what you normally would without good genetics. And that's so valuable.
Now we're talking about cattle. Now I'm talking about the increase in weight, and that's the same thing as increasing yield in forestry. Is that keeping your other constraints? Is that keeping everything constant, and you're just changing your genetics in the bull that you're seeing that?
Yes, yes, absolutely.
Okay. Yeah, some people sometimes say people get a misconception and they say, well, you changed the genetics, but you also changed this and you also changed that. And while that is that is something that a landowner can do, but still that genetics just by itself can have a significant impact on the the quality traits.
Yes,
Okay.
and it's whatever you're looking for, as far as wet passes down, there's different genetics in cattle, so,
Hmm.
and it's much like the trees have different genetics. If you're looking for more poles, you're looking for straightness or volume gains or limb diameter. I mean, you want to breed or grow to those genetics that suit your market the best.
Right, right. So let's compare that back to cattle again. What are the quality traits in a cow in with a cattle compared to the quality traits in timber? Like, we were talking about, like you just mentioned there, the quality traits in forestry with straight stems, forking. How does that compare in with cattle?
In cattle, we talk in cattle by weaning weight. We talk in cattle by birth weight. We talk in cattle by marbling at the end of the processing. Some bulls have maternal traits, so it's a kind of a little bit different production based off of where you want to go with your herd. If
Hmm.
you're wanting one for weaning weights or pounds across the scales, it might be one genetic bull. If you're wanting a bull for maternal traits that has a high milking quality, it'd be a different bull that you put on a different group of cows so that you might keep replacement heifers out of them. So, it varies a little bit more. There's a little bit more variability in cattle, as far as what you can do with that. But most of us look at a weaning weight, and birth weights are important to both. To me, it depends on if you're breeding to a cow, or a heifer. Depends on what you're covering them with. So
So let me ask you this: do you also keep up with the genetic background pedigree of the heifers as well?
mostly, yes, I do.
Mostly, yeah. Kinda like our MCP pines where we know the genetic background and the pedigree of both the mother and the father. It's kinda like doing the same thing with cattle.
Absolutely, absolutely. Because the mother will
Okay,
pass good traits along to or bad traits.
okay.
If you have one that's not a good nurturer mother, you know what I'm
Mhm.
saying? So she'll pass a lot of times pass that on to her daughters. So
And
you
that's
want
genetic. That
that.
is passed on through genetics. Wow. That is what I would have thought would have been a learned behavior is genetic there. That's incredible. That is really interesting. I think you and I could sit here and talk about cattle all day long because it's something that we both have an interest in. But getting back to forestry and everything, so you're going to be, you live, where is it that you live now?
I live in southeast Oklahoma. It's just south of Idaville. It's about 5 minutes from Texas and 5 minutes from Arkansas. It's right here in the very corner of Oklahoma.
So you are very strategically located for us.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay. Well, good. Well, great. Talk to me a little bit about the forest industry that's there in your area and your markets and how it relates to what you do and to your every.
We've been real fortunate in Southeast Oklahoma. We've had a great timber market for several years. We
Mhm.
truly have. We've had Weyerhaeuser's played a big influence in here. They've had two sawmills, one in Arkansas, one in Oklahoma that they're currently running. There's a large paper mill here that consumes one of the largest brown paper mills in the world. This is the one I worked at there. At the time, it was the largest. I think it might have changed here recently since some new paper mills have come online in Brazil and different stuff. But at one time, it was the largest brown paper mill in the world. And then we also have a OSB mill here. So
Okay.
we've been real fortunate to have a good market. Now, markets change consistently. They always do. So, you see the highs and the lows. I went through the low of 2008 where the housing regime kind of went out and, it had a negative impact on the market. And the market seems to be stable at best right now, I would say. I
Mhm.
mean, there is some changes in the markets but, but that's where genetics come into play so much more important. You know what I'm
Right.
saying? If you have the top of the line, it's the same way with the cattle market when you carry your calves to the sale, if you have the best calves at the sale, you're guaranteed the best price. You are paid for your genetics for the cattle,
Right.
and they're able to identify those. You know what I'm saying? So, and same way with your trees. When you're growing a higher quality tree, you're shortening your rotations on it. You've got better limb sizes. You've got a better straightness, less forking, because that's what you want at the end of the day is a higher desired product to put you into a higher class so
Right.
that you get the best value out of your land because land produces a certain amount of value per acre. So the markets are what they are. You don't have a lot of control over those, but
Right.
whatever market you sell in, you want to be at the top of your game. So whether it's land, cattle, or timber.
So you used a really good term there. You said creating values. Like with your going back to your cattle, when you introduce new genetics into your herd, you're doing it to create value for your commodity or what you're selling at the end, your calves there at the end to get a better price for those. And the same thing goes for forestry. So your background in procurement with Weyerhaeuser there in your area, what were some of the traits? Now, when you bought stumpage, were you buying for a sawmill or were you buying for a pulp mill or just all of the mills in the area?
When I began my career with Weyerhaeuser there, I was buying, actually, Weyerhaeuser was really dominant in this area. We had a
Mhm.
hardwood mill, we had a plywood mill, we had a lumber mill, and we had a pole mill all at one facility pretty much. So you could bring in about any product and we would have a house for it, a home for it to go
Okay.
to. As things evolved, and they also owned a paper mill at that time that International Paper owns. But as things evolved, the plywood mill went out of business, the hardwood mill closed, but they kept the lumber mill and kept the paper mill, and later sold the paper mill off. When you would go out and look at a product today, at the end of my buying for them, we were more isolated or more looking for logs, high quality logs. And that's kind of where they're at today. We'd go out and we'd cruise a stand. We'd give it a like overall value of it, how we processed it, how we characteristics of that stand.
Mhm.
When we cruised it, we'd actually do an intense cruise on it. The log percentages out of it would range on every stand. The age of it was important. The density of it was important. The limbs on it were important, how that it was
Right.
going to delimb, just the form class, the structure of the tree, just the
Right.
overall appearance of the stand. There's times, and I could take you to stands and show you that produced a lot of volume, but produced a very low quality product from older genetics that we've had out there. I mean, they didn't have the capability of making a high quality log. So,
Right. It just wasn't there. It wasn't in the pedigree
yeah.
of what was there. Right, right. So you was talking about those quality traits and everything. And talking about the higher, it had a very high volume, but it was probably low valued because of its quality traits. So what traits would you, I mean, when you were going out and you were looking to procure logs to feed your meal, what would you say was the most important trait that you were looking for when you went into that stand?
The most important trait we was looking for was probably the size, diameter, and the straightness of it. Just
Mhm.
the appearance of the tree, just the quality of it. Because you could look at it and tell pretty quick to where that had any log availability in it or not. It's just hard to put a words to it because you can go out and see it. I could walk through you with stands and show you this tree would be better, this tree would be better. Mainly it's the appearance and the size of the tree. You know what I'm
Right.
saying?
So the straightness, it's kind of like I've said in the past that you can always put a saw log through a pulp mill, but you can't reverse that process. You cannot put a pulpwood log through a sawmill. Basically, what I'm saying is if that log isn't straight, you're not going to get a straight board out of it. You're not going to be able to cut. I mean, our sawmills today that are running so efficiently in the United States, they're the most state of the art sawmills, and they're just constantly getting better. And all those sawmills, they have new now X-ray machines, they have merchandising machines, they have processes that maximizes the product that they can get out of each individual log. But let's face it, if that log isn't straight, there's no amount of twisting, turning that machine or that computer can do to fix that problem.
To offset it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that is just people I don't think people a lot of times they understand just how important that straightness is. And, today with the genetics that we have, we have trees that have straightness scores that are vastly superior to the genetics of old, like you were just talking about. Might be a great yielder. It might be a great, just like going back to cattle, that the calf it produces may be a great, as far as putting on weight, but it may have some other characteristics that just kill its value in the market. There's no way that you're going to be able to get a top what's the word, a top value for certain
Right.
things because of that.
Yeah. And that's like the timber business. I mean, that's when we would go out and we would cruise every track. The reason why you
Hmm.
cruise it was one to determine volume on it, and the other one was to determine quality. You
Right.
know, and when we cruise it, you basically put just a standard or a grid across it, where that you cover the entire ground. You see every aspect of the deal, and you kind of weight each tree, puts a value on it,
Hmm.
and gives you a better idea of what's going to be out there. So like you said, you can't take a poor quality tree and make a high quality board out of it.
Right.
And
Right.
and at the end of the day, that's what we were looking for, was how could we capture volume, or not volume so much, but value on our products? How could we help the mills be more successful, and identifying your right markets?
So let me ask you this. So when you were procuring wood for the mill and in your previous career, were you working primarily on company land or were you working with private landowners in your area?
We did both.
You did both. So you had a lot of experience working with private landowners.
Yes, most of mine was with private landowners. Yeah, when
Okay.
carrying out, we'd buy, and that's why every track was different. You had to go
Okay.
out and spend a lot of time with it to look at it, to see what was on there. You know what I mean? To see the value of the track.
I think that's one thing that I value so much with what I do in my day-to-day job is working with private landowners like ourselves and, trying to help them create higher value for their private property that they are going to hand down to their next generation. And hopefully those private farms will remain private and will remain with what we call the non-industrial private forest landowners or NIPF landowners like ourselves. Hopefully those are lasting legacies. Those farms have been in families. I have a farm that's been in my family for 7 generations, and, that's a legacy that goes a long way with what we do. But, also, there's a working I find it to be rewarding, and I've also find just being honest with private landowners and the transparency because I can relate to them so well. Talk about your interaction there working with private landowners.
One of the biggest thing with private landowners, I love spending time with them and talking to them and seeing their perspective, because everybody's desired outcome is different. You know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
Some people might want a more aesthetic valued timber. They might be more into water quality. They might be more into wildlife. They might be more into growing timber or producing money, or they might be more into a legacy. I want
Right,
something that I can leave my kids that they're proud of. So when I sit down and I talk to my landowners, the biggest thing is I try to find out what their goals and their objectives are, what they want to do with this land, what's their vision with it. And then I try to help them work towards that.
right,
Whether a higher standard genetics, I mean, we plant lots of wildlife trees too, and we grow lots of hardwoods and different ones. So, everybody's objective is a little bit different. Some people might own 40 acres that they want to pass on to their kids forever, and have a place they can go and just spend the day,
right,
and that's okay, because that's great too. And other people might be strictly, how can I get the most value out of my property as quick as possible, for as produce the most saw timber or the most poles or whatever value it is. So every landowner's objective is a little bit different. They seem to have the same. Most of them want to do a little timber, a little wildlife, a little this. It's kind of a blended objective on some of them. So I just help them reach their goals. So that.
yeah. I think that's the number one question that every forestry program, it doesn't matter what school you go to, the number one question that you ask the landowner is, "What are your objectives?" And all of those are going to be different. But there's also good ways to integrate multiple objectives. Like, used to when I started out in forestry, the number one objective was revenue from timber production. And now we are getting into where that is becoming an equal objective with wildlife management, or even a secondary objective in wildlife management and enjoyment, family enjoyment. aesthetics being the primary objective, but there's always a way to integrate both, and you can have both. It's just always able to. I've always said that a healthy forest, regardless of what you're managing for, a healthy forest is going to take care of all of the goals, whether it's wildlife. And let's face it, whether we're talking about large game, small game,
Mhm.
wildlife, some people want to manage for birding, some people want to manage for hunting, but as long as you keep the timber healthy, that other stuff is going to come into it's going to fall right in line.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah. So, well, that's interesting. So, with your expertise in working with private landowners, so you probably built a lot of trust with landowners in your area.
Trust is key with everything that you do. I mean, you got to be held accountable and have the value that you trust someone. You know what I mean? 'Cause
Right.
uh, trust, if you lose their trust, you've lost everything with them, in my opinion. And that's how you build strong forests and strong relationships. So,
Hmm. Hmm.
and helping them, giving them good advice, helping them work through stuff, having them have a product or a stand of timber or a tract of land that they're proud of. So, and
Right.
trusting that you're truly got their best interest in mind, because as a procurement forester, a lot of times you had to go out there and, you're buying for a meal or something, but they have to trust you with their land. And they went to several logging jobs. And they've seen a tract that didn't look like something they wanted to have done on their land before. So you educate them, and then they had to trust you to be able to produce what you promised them. And trust is everything. So,
Yeah. I mean, it's if you can't trust somebody, then you don't have anything to build on. So all right, well, that's interesting. So, would you monitor the loads of logs? Did you also work at the mill, and would you see them coming into the mill and as they were being brought in?
yes, yeah, yeah, we
Okay.
monitored. Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
And would you, as the trucks were coming in, would you notice any traits of, let's say, traits that were, for lack of a better words, that would cause trucks to get turned around at the mill or get docked because they did not meet quality traits?
Absolutely. There's all kinds of docks and turnaround deals at the mill. Crooks, hems, sweeps, uh, anything that has excessive knots on it. Knots
Hmm.
is a big thing with a mill. So they actually do log quality rollouts. I spent several days when I was contracting in my beginning with a warehouser, where we would actually bring in a log truck, unload it, roll out the entire load of logs, measure the length of them, measure the top diameter, the butt diameter of it, and basically look for any defects within that log. Whether it's like a
Hmm.
fork or bad knots or a crook or a sweep or something that you might not be able to see now. Like you said, they got a lot of scanners that when a log truck shows up, they're able to scan that load and look for imperfections within it. You know what I mean? So, like in West Fraser, I know they've got one that's similar to that. So,
Right.
Hauser still does the rollouts. They still have a contractor up there that rolls out. I don't know what the percentage is, but it's a certain percentage of the wood that they buy just to kind of keep a check on what's coming in.
Hmm.
So, genetics matter. I mean, when it
So,
comes to that. So,
let me ask you this. Back in my days when I was teaching at Mississippi State and we would have an exercise at a meal, we would go out and it kind of similar to what you would say there, roll out logs and measuring the length and all of that. And it's basically what was called log scaling. And, I don't know if you're familiar with that term of log scaling,
yeah.
but we would go out and we would scale logs to basically check the volume and check for defects and everything like that. But we would also measure the form class of the logs. Did y'all look at any of the form class?
Yes, but not as it was more of a defect areas that we was looking at, so
Okay.
just the defects on it, so but that helped determine they would use those numbers a lot for putting up, like, the cubic foot per lineal foot and stuff whenever they would
Hmm.
bring wood in, how many pieces was on it, we'd know the weight, we'd know the stem count, so they did use that as, some of their metrics later on,
Right.
so
So you mentioned something earlier also about limb size. And, we know that larger limbs create larger knots, which creates defects in wood. And we also know that limb size, limb taper, and angle, is controlled by genetics. And would you see a large variation in that as you as you saw logs come in?
Yes, you would, especially like
Yeah.
on native stands, natural stands, and the
Hmm.
first set of genetics that come out. Yeah, we've learned a lot. We've learned a lot over the last 30 years in genetics. I don't
Hmm.
know. When you first started, when I was in college, they said like a rotation was a 40-year rotation. Is that kind of what I was taught? Well, as soon as I got into the industry side of it through warehouse and stuff, we started trying to shorten. The first thing they want to do was shorten the rotation. So, like warehousers at a 27-year rotation, typically now 28-year rotation. And as that happened or evolved, then they started working on quality. We started
Hmm.
trying to work on quality and genetics and limb size. We realized that there was other factors besides just shortening the rotation that could add value to our stand. So could add value to your timber, your property.
Right.
So
Right.
yeah.
Well, that is really interesting. That's really incredible. I'd like to welcome you again to the ArborGen Reforestation Advisor team. I think we're going to have a lot of great years working together and everything. And just as an introductory to the landowners, consultants, foresters, timber buyers, everybody in your area, Clint Ebert, as the ArborGen Reforestation Advisor for Oklahoma and Arkansas. You're going to primarily be working out of the Bluff City, Arkansas nursery, and you have already jumped out to a fast start with meeting people in that area. Is there anything you would like to say to everybody as an introductory to, again, to introduce yourself to the landowners in that area?
I just like to thank, the team, the ArborGen team. It's a great opportunity. I really am looking forward to working with new landowners across Arkansas and stuff. So it's a great, great state to work in, even in Oklahoma. Oklahoma, we're kind of limited to the southeast corner of it here. It's a small
Hmm.
portion, but Arkansas has got a much bigger area and there's lots of new people to meet out there. So I look forward to meeting each and every one of you. So reach out to me, get in contact with me, or I'll try to get in contact with you either way.
All right.
Look forward to hearing from them.
Well, I'd like to also tell everybody that if you would like to get Clint's contact information, please feel free to visit our website at arborgen.com. And I would like to thank everybody for joining us today for this edition, this introductory edition of the ArborGen TreeLines podcast. If anybody out there wants more information about our genetics or forestry in general, please reach out to us. Find us on the website and feel free to contact us anytime. With that, I'm your host, Paul Jeffries, and thank you again for joining us for this edition of the Tree Lines Podcast.